What happens when a man who had everything loses it all, and finds something even greater in its place? This is the story of Nathan Sterling, a billionaire trapped between life and death, a nurse who refused to give up on him, and a love that defied every odd. But beware, not everyone wants him to wake up. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the polished floors of St. Augustine Hospital. It was one of those rare moments when the sterile white walls and fluorescent lights seemed less clinical and more like a quiet sanctuary. But even then, there was something about this place that always felt cold, like it had seen too much pain, too many lives hanging by threads, and yet remained indifferent to all of it. Emma Caldwell walked briskly down the hallway, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the tile floor. She adjusted the strap of her scrubs as she glanced at her watch. Her shift had started an hour ago, but already, she could feel the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. Emma wasn't new to nursing, she'd been doing this for nearly 8 years now. Yet every time she stepped into St. Augustine, it felt like stepping onto a battlefield, a controlled chaos where life and death danced dangerously close together. As she turned the corner toward the ICU wing, her pager buzzed loudly against her hip. Startled, she pulled it from her pocket and squinted at the tiny screen. Dr. Gray's office, it read in bold letters. Her stomach tightened instantly. Being summoned to Dr. Lawrence Gray's office was never good news. He was the kind of man who commanded respect with his presence alone, tall, impeccably dressed, and sharp-eyed, with a voice that could cut through steel if he wanted it to. Emma had only crossed paths with him a handful of times, but each encounter left her feeling both intimidated and slightly unsettled. She hesitated for a moment outside his door, smoothing her hair back into its loose ponytail before knocking softly. "Come in," came the deep, authoritative reply. Pushing the door open, Emma stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of leather and antiseptic, a strange combination that somehow suited Dr. Gray perfectly. He sat behind his desk, typing furiously on his laptop, his glasses perched low on his nose. Papers were scattered neatly around him, and a single mug of coffee sat untouched beside his keyboard. Without looking up, he gestured for her to take a seat. "You're Emma Caldwell?" he asked finally, his tone clipped but not unkind. "Yes, sir," she replied, sitting down cautiously. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those piercing gray eyes of his. "I've reviewed your file," he said after a pause. "Impressive work ethic. Dedicated. Reliable. Exactly what I need right now." Emma blinked, unsure how to respond. Compliments from Dr. Gray were rare, almost mythical. She nodded slowly, waiting for him to continue. "There's a patient I want you to oversee," he explained, folding his hands on top of his desk. "Nathan Sterling. You might have heard of him. Well, let's just say he's someone important." The name struck a chord immediately. Nathan Sterling. Of course she'd heard of him. Everyone had. He was the billionaire tech mogul who'd built an empire out of nothing, revolutionizing industries with innovations no one else could have dreamed of. His face had graced magazine covers, his interviews had gone viral online, and his philanthropy had earned him admiration worldwide. And then, just over a year ago, he'd vanished from the public eye completely. Rumors swirled, some said he'd burned out, others claimed he'd faked his own disappearance, but the truth was far darker. A car accident. A coma. And here he was, lying unconscious in room 417 of St. Augustine Hospital. "He's been under our care for 14 months, Dr. Gray continued. "His condition is stable, but," he trailed off, choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say his case requires special attention. Not because of his medical needs, they're minimal, but because of who he is. His family insists on discretion. Privacy. They don't trust anyone easily." Emma swallowed hard. This sounded complicated. What exactly would my role be? You'll be his primary caregiver, Dr. Gray said simply. Monitor his vitals, administer medications, ensure his comfort. Basic duties, really. But I'm assigning you specifically because I believe you can handle the pressure. Can you? She hesitated, her mind racing. Taking care of a high-profile patient like Nathan Sterling would mean constant scrutiny, not just from his family, but from the media, the hospital administration, maybe even herself. Still, she couldn't deny the challenge intrigued her. Yes, sir, she said firmly. I can do it. Good. Dr. Gray stood, signaling the end of their meeting. Report to room 417 first thing tomorrow morning. And remember, discretion is key. No gossip, no slip-ups. Understood? Understood. With that, Emma left the office, her heart pounding. She didn't know whether to feel excited or terrified, or both. Either way, she knew her life was about to change. The next morning, Emma made her way to room 417 with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The door was slightly ajar, and she pushed it open gently, revealing a space that was unlike any hospital room she'd ever seen. It was luxurious, almost absurdly so. Plush armchairs sat in the corners, expensive artwork adorned the walls, and fresh flowers filled vases on every available surface. Even the bed Nathan Sterling lay in looked more like something you'd find in a five-star hotel than a medical facility. But despite the opulence, the room felt eerily empty. Lifeless. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the soft hum of machines monitoring Nathan's vital signs. Emma approached the bed cautiously, her gaze falling on the man lying motionless beneath the crisp white sheets. Nathan Sterling looked younger in person than he did in photos. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, his features chiseled and striking even in repose. Tubes and wires snaked around him, connecting him to various machines, but they did little to detract from his natural charisma. There was something haunting about seeing someone so powerful reduced to such vulnerability. Emma took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. She began her routine, checking his vitals, adjusting the four-drip, making notes on her clipboard. But as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. It was irrational, of course, he was in a coma, completely unaware of his surroundings, but the sensation lingered nonetheless. "Hi, Mr. Sterling," she murmured softly, half-jokingly. "I'm Emma. I'll be taking care of you from now on. Don't worry, I promise I won't let anything happen to you." For a brief moment, she thought she saw his eyelids flicker. Shaking her head, she dismissed it as a trick of the light. Still, the idea stuck with her. What if he could hear her? What if, somewhere deep inside, he was still aware of the world around him? Over the next few hours, Emma found herself talking to him more than she intended. She told him about her day, about the weather outside, about random thoughts that popped into her head. It wasn't part of her job description, but it felt right. Like maybe, just maybe, her voice could reach him in some small way. By the time her shift ended, Emma realized she hadn't once checked the clock. For the first time in a long while, she felt genuinely connected to her work. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them. Days turned into weeks, and Emma settled into a rhythm with Nathan Sterling. Her mornings began the same way every day, grabbing a quick cup of coffee from the hospital cafeteria, reviewing his chart, and heading straight to room 417. The room still felt surreal, like stepping into another world entirely, but over time, it started to feel less foreign and more like a second home. Or at least, as close to home as a sterile hospital could ever be. Each morning, she'd greet him warmly, even though he never responded. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," she'd say, her voice soft but steady. "It's Emma again. Another day closer to waking up, right?" She'd adjust his pillows, check his vitals, and make sure everything was running smoothly. But beyond the clinical tasks, she found herself lingering longer than necessary, talking to him about anything and everything. At first, it had been awkward. Who talks to someone in a coma? But the more she did it, the easier it became. She told him about her favorite TV shows, shared funny stories from her childhood, and even confessed some of her deepest fears. It wasn't just idle chatter, it was a way for her to connect, to remind herself that beneath all the machines and tubes, there was still a person inside. Someone who deserved kindness, respect, and maybe even friendship. One afternoon, while adjusting the blinds to let in some sunlight, she paused and looked at him thoughtfully. "You know, Mr. Sterling, I think you'd hate this room if you were awake. All these fancy decorations, it doesn't suit you. From what I've read, you're more of a minimalist. Clean lines, no clutter. Maybe we should redecorate." She chuckled softly, imagining his reaction. "Of course, your family would probably have a fit. They seem particular." Her words hung in the air, unanswered as always. Yet somehow, the silence didn't feel quite so heavy anymore. It was almost comforting, like sharing secrets with an old friend who simply needed time to respond. Outside of work, Emma tried to maintain some semblance of a normal life. That usually meant dinner with her best friend, Lisa Carter, at their favorite diner downtown. Lisa was the complete opposite of Emma, outgoing, bold, and unapologetically sarcastic. Where Emma preferred quiet evenings with a book, Lisa thrived on drama and excitement. Still, they balanced each other out perfectly, their friendship built on years of shared laughter and late-night conversations. So, Lisa began one evening, swirling her milkshake with a straw. "How's Sleeping Beauty doing?" Emma rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a smile. "His name is Nathan, Lisa. And he's not exactly Sleeping Beauty." Sure, Lisa teased, leaning forward conspiratorially. "But come on, Em. You spend more time with him than anyone else. Don't tell me you haven't noticed how ridiculously handsome he is." "It's not like that," Emma protested, though her cheeks flushed slightly. "He's my patient. My job is to take care of him, not swoon over him." Lisa raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. Keep telling yourself that. But seriously, isn't it weird? Talking to someone who can't talk back? Not really, Emma admitted after a moment. I mean, yeah, it's different. But it's also nice. Like I'm making a difference, even if he doesn't realize it yet. Lisa studied her for a moment, then grinned mischievously. You're falling for him, aren't you? What? No. Emma exclaimed, nearly choking on her fries. That's ridiculous. He's in a coma. Exactly, Lisa shot back, laughing. Which makes it even more romantic. You're basically waiting for your prince to wake up. Emma groaned, burying her face in her hands. You're impossible. But deep down, she couldn't deny that Lisa's words stirred something within her. Was she growing attached to Nathan? Of course she was, it was hard not to when she spent so much time with him. But love? That was absurd. Right? Back at the hospital, Emma continued her routine, unaware of the small miracle brewing beneath the surface. One evening, as she adjusted Nathan's foreline, she froze. For a split second, she could have sworn his fingers twitched. Blinking rapidly, she leaned closer, watching intently. Did you just, she whispered, her heart racing. She reached out hesitantly, placing her hand near his. Nothing happened. Disappointed, she shook her head. Must have been my imagination. But later that night, as she prepared to leave, it happened again. This time, there was no mistaking it. His index finger moved ever so slightly, brushing against the edge of the blanket. Emma gasped, her pulse hammering in her ears. Dr. Gray, she called out urgently, rushing to find him. When she finally tracked him down in the hallway, she practically burst with excitement. You need to come see this. Nathan, he moved his finger. Dr. Gray frowned, following her back to the room. By the time they arrived, however, Nathan lay perfectly still once more. Dr. Gray examined him carefully, checking the monitors and inspecting his limbs. It's likely just a muscle spasm, he concluded dismissively. Comatose patients sometimes exhibit involuntary movements. It's nothing unusual. Emma wanted to argue, to insist that what she'd seen was real, but she bit her tongue. Arguing with Dr. Gray rarely ended well, and besides, she knew how skeptical doctors could be about anecdotal evidence. Still, as she returned to Nathan's bedside later that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had occurred. "You're trying, aren't you?" she murmured, taking his hand gently in hers. "Don't give up, okay? I'm here. I'll keep talking, keep hoping. Together, we'll get through this." For the first time since starting her assignment, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, Nathan Sterling wasn't as lost as everyone thought. And if he could hear her, if he could feel her presence, then she owed it to him to stay by his side until he woke up. The days that followed Nathan's first twitch were a whirlwind of anticipation and uncertainty. Emma found herself watching him even more closely now, her eyes scanning for any sign of movement, another flicker of life beneath the surface. She couldn't explain why, but she felt certain something was changing. It wasn't just wishful thinking, there was an energy in the room, subtle yet undeniable, as though Nathan Sterling was slowly clawing his way back to consciousness. Every morning, she greeted him with renewed hope. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," she'd say, her voice steady despite the butterflies fluttering in her stomach. "You've got this. Just keep fighting." And every evening, before leaving, she'd squeeze his hand gently. "I'll see you tomorrow." One afternoon, while adjusting the blankets around him, Emma felt it, a faint pressure on her wrist. At first, she thought she imagined it again, like last time. But then it happened again, stronger this time. His fingers wrapped weakly around her wrist, trembling but unmistakable. Her breath caught in her throat. "Nathan," she whispered, leaning closer. "Can you hear me?" His grip tightened ever so slightly, and Emma's heart raced. This wasn't a spasm, it was deliberate. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes as she pressed the call button for assistance. Within moments, a nurse appeared, wide-eyed and startled. "He moved!" Emma exclaimed, her voice shaking with excitement. "He grabbed my wrist." The nurse hurried over, examining Nathan carefully. Sure enough, his fingers twitched again, brushing against Emma's skin. Word spread quickly through the hospital, and soon Dr. Gray arrived, his usual calm demeanor replaced by cautious curiosity. "We need to run tests," he said firmly, ordering a series of scans to assess Nathan's brain activity. As the medical team worked around her, Emma stood silently in the corner, her mind racing. Could this really be happening? Was Nathan finally waking up? That night, after most of the staff had gone home, Emma stayed late, unwilling to leave Nathan's side. She sat beside him, holding his hand, whispering words of encouragement. "You're doing amazing," she murmured softly. "Just a little further, okay? You can do this." And then, without warning, it happened. His eyelids fluttered, and for a moment, Emma thought she might faint. Slowly, painfully, his eyes opened, revealing dark irises clouded with confusion. He blinked several times, trying to focus, his gaze darting around the room until it landed on Emma. Her breath hitched. "Nathan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's me, Emma. You're safe." For a split second, their eyes locked, and Emma felt a surge of emotion unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Then, panic set in. Nathan's breathing quickened, his chest rising and falling erratically. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a hoarse rasp. "Help!" Emma shouted, pressing the emergency button. Within seconds, Dr. Gray and a team of nurses rushed into the room, surrounding Nathan's bed. "Stay calm, Mr. Sterling," Dr. Gray instructed, his tone firm but reassuring. "You're in the hospital. You've been unconscious for some time, but you're safe now." Nathan's eyes widened, his expression a mixture of fear and bewilderment. He struggled to sit up, but the medical staff gently held him down. "What? Where?" he croaked, his voice raw and strained. "You were in an accident," Dr. Gray explained patiently. "Do you remember anything?" Nathan hesitated, his brow furrowing as he searched his fragmented memories. "No," he admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't remember anything." Emma's heart sank. Amnesia. Of course it made sense given the severity of his injuries, but hearing him confirm it broke something inside her. She wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but she forced herself to stay back, letting the doctors do their job. Over the next few hours, the medical team conducted a battery of tests, confirming what they already suspected. Nathan's brain activity was increasing rapidly, but significant portions of his memory remained inaccessible. When they finally left the room, Emma approached cautiously, unsure how to proceed. "Hi," she said softly, pulling up a chair beside his bed. "How are you feeling?" Nathan turned his head toward her, studying her face intently. Who are you?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "I'm Emma," she replied, offering a small smile. "I've been taking care of you." His lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to say something more, but instead, he looked away, staring blankly at the ceiling. I don't know who I am," he admitted quietly, his voice tinged with frustration. "Everything feels wrong." Emma nodded sympathetically. "That's normal, given what you've been through. Your memories might come back gradually. In the meantime, we'll help you piece things together." He glanced at her again, his gaze searching. "There's something else," he said after a pause. "A feeling, like I was in danger before the accident. Like someone was after me." Emma frowned, her stomach tightening. "After you?" "I don't know," he admitted, rubbing his temples. "It's fuzzy. Maybe it's nothing. But it won't leave my mind." She hesitated, unsure how to respond. Should she tell him about his life, the billionaire tech mogul, the empire he'd built? Or would that overwhelm him further? For now, she decided to keep things simple. "Let's focus on getting you better first," she suggested gently. "We'll figure everything else out later." Nathan nodded slowly, though his expression remained troubled. Despite his confusion, there was something about him, his determination, his quiet strength, that reassured Emma. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew he wouldn't give up easily. As she sat with him, listening to his halting attempts to make sense of the world around him, Emma realized something profound. Nathan Sterling wasn't just her patient anymore. Somewhere along the way, he'd become something far more important. A friend. A mystery. A man worth fighting for. The days following Nathan's awakening were a blur of physical therapy, cognitive exercises, and endless questions. Each morning, Emma would arrive to find him sitting up in bed, staring out the window with an expression that was equal parts contemplation and frustration. His body was weak from months of immobility, his muscles atrophied to the point where even lifting a glass of water felt like a monumental task. But despite the setbacks, Nathan approached every challenge with quiet determination. "Let's try again," he said one afternoon, gripping the edge of the walker tightly as he attempted to take another step. His legs wobbled beneath him, threatening to buckle, but he refused to give up. "I can do this." Emma stood nearby, ready to catch him if he fell. "Take it slow, Nathan," she urged gently. "You're doing great." He shot her a brief glance, his lips curving into a faint smile. "Thanks for saying that, but I know I look ridiculous." "You don't," she replied firmly. "Recovery takes time. You're stronger than you think. Nathan didn't respond immediately, focusing instead on steadying himself. After a moment, he took another shaky step forward, then another, until he finally reached the end of the hallway. Exhausted but triumphant, he leaned against the wall, letting out a breathless laugh. "I did it," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "Yes, you did," Emma said, beaming. "See? Progress." As the weeks went by, Nathan began to regain some semblance of independence. He could walk short distances without assistance, feed himself, and even hold conversations without struggling for words. Yet there was something different about him now, something softer, kinder. The ruthless businessman who had once dominated headlines seemed to have vanished, replaced by a man who spoke thoughtfully and listened intently. It was as though the accident had stripped away layers of arrogance and ambition, leaving behind someone far more human. Emma noticed the change most acutely during their late-night talks. After the nurses left and the hospital grew quiet, they would sit together, sharing stories about their lives. Nathan still struggled to recall much of his past, but he often spoke about fleeting memories, a childhood spent tinkering with gadgets in his garage, long hours spent working late at an office he couldn't quite picture, the nagging sense that something, or someone, had been chasing him before the accident. "I wish I could remember more," he confessed one evening, his voice tinged with frustration. "It feels like pieces of me are missing." Emma nodded sympathetically. "Your memories might come back over time. Until then, focus on building new ones." He smiled faintly, turning to look at her. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy," she admitted. "But you're not alone. I'm here." Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was an unspoken connection between them, a bond forged through months of shared silence and whispered words. Emma knew she should maintain professional boundaries, but it was becoming harder to ignore the way her heart raced whenever he looked at her. Despite his progress, Nathan's recovery wasn't without its challenges. One afternoon, while reviewing his medical file, Emma stumbled upon a note from the hospital administrator. It mentioned that Nathan's family had stopped visiting weeks ago, citing personal reasons. Curious, and slightly alarmed, she dug deeper, uncovering a series of emails exchanged between Dr. Gray and Eleanor Sterling, Nathan's estranged mother. "We've done all we can for him," Eleanor had written coldly. "His condition is stable, and our obligations are fulfilled. Please cease sending updates." Emma stared at the screen, her stomach sinking. How could someone abandon their own son like that? She debated whether or not to tell Nathan, but ultimately decided against it. He already had enough to deal with, learning that his family had given up on him would only add to his pain. Instead, she resolved to fill the void left by his absence of visitors. She brought him books to read, played music he seemed to enjoy, and encouraged him to express himself through art. Slowly but surely, Nathan began to open up, revealing glimpses of the man he used to be, and the man he was becoming. One night, as they sat together in his room, Nathan turned to her suddenly. "Emma?" "Yes," she replied, looking up from the sketchpad in her lap. I wanted to say thank you," he said softly. "For everything. I don't know what I'd do without you." Her cheeks flushed, and she glanced down at her hands. "It's my job, Nathan. I'm just doing what anyone would do." "No," he insisted, shaking his head. "It's more than that. You care. You really care. And it makes me feel safe." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Emma swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. "You deserve to feel safe," she said finally. "Everyone does." Nathan studied her for a moment, his gaze softening. "I don't remember much about my life before the accident," he admitted. "But I know this, I trust you. More than anyone else." Her heart skipped a beat, and she forced herself to look away, pretending to adjust the blankets around him. Get some rest, okay, she said lightly, trying to mask the emotions swirling inside her. We'll talk more tomorrow. As she left the room, closing the door quietly behind her, Emma leaned against the wall, exhaling deeply. She couldn't deny the growing feelings she had for Nathan, but acting on them would only complicate things further. For now, she told herself, her priority was helping him heal. Everything else could wait. Over the next few days, Emma threw herself into her work, determined to keep her distance emotionally. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't ignore the way Nathan's presence affected her. The way his laughter brightened her day. The way his gratitude made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. One evening, as she prepared to leave, Nathan called out to her. Emma? She paused, turning back toward him. Yes? He hesitated, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his blanket. Do you think, maybe someday, when I'm better, we could grab coffee? Outside of here? Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. Then, slowly, she smiled. I'd like that. As she walked away, her heart soared. Whatever the future held, one thing was certain, Nathan Sterling had changed her life in ways she never expected, and she was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, she was changing his too. It started with a nagging feeling, a thread Emma couldn't quite pull on but refused to ignore. For weeks, she'd been piecing together fragments of Nathan's life, trying to help him rebuild his identity. But something about the accident report didn't sit right with her. It was buried deep in the hospital archives, tucked away like an afterthought, but when Emma finally tracked it down, she felt a chill run down her spine. The report itself was sparse, just a few paragraphs detailing the crash. A single-car accident on a rainy night. No witnesses. No explanation beyond driver error. Yet as Emma read through it again and again, one detail stood out: the brakes had failed. Not worn out or malfunctioned naturally, they'd been tampered with. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the file, her mind racing. This wasn't just an accident. Someone had tried to kill Nathan Sterling. The next morning, Emma arrived at work earlier than usual, her thoughts consumed by what she'd uncovered. She debated whether or not to tell Nathan, knowing it could shatter the fragile sense of peace he'd begun to find. But keeping it from him felt wrong too. He deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Before making any decisions, she decided to dig deeper. After a quick search online, she found the name of the detective who had handled the initial investigation, Marcus Hale. Taking a deep breath, she picked up the phone and dialed his number. Detective Hale, came the gruff voice on the other end. Hi, Detective, Emma began nervously. My name is Emma Caldwell. I'm a nurse at St. Augustine Hospital. I'm calling about a patient of mine, Nathan Sterling. His accident, there are some things that don't add up. There was a long pause before Detective Hale responded. Nathan Sterling? That case was closed years ago. What makes you think something's off? Emma hesitated, then plunged ahead. I reviewed the accident report, and it mentions brake failure. But based on what I've seen, and heard, it seems like someone deliberately sabotaged his car. Another pause, this one heavier. You're saying you think it was intentional? Yes, Emma replied firmly. And I think Nathan's life is still in danger. Detective Hale sighed audibly. Look, Ms. Caldwell, I'll look into it. But I can't promise anything. Cases like this, they get messy. Thank you, Emma said, relief washing over her. That's all I ask. Later that day, Emma sat with Nathan in his room, debating how much to tell him. He was sketching idly in the notebook she'd given him, his brow furrowed in concentration. Watching him, she felt a pang of guilt. How could she disrupt the progress he'd made? But lying to him, or withholding the truth, felt worse. Nathan, she began cautiously, pulling up a chair beside him. There's something I need to talk to you about. He glanced up, sensing the seriousness in her tone. What is it? She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. I looked into your accident, the one that put you in a coma. Anne. I don't think it was an accident. His pencil froze mid-stroke, and he stared at her, wide-eyed. What do you mean? The brakes on your car were tampered with, she explained softly. Someone tried to hurt you, Nathan. Maybe even kill you. For a moment, he said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he set the notebook aside and leaned back against the pillows, rubbing his temples. Why would anyone want to kill me? I don't know, Emma admitted. But we need to figure it out. Together. Nathan nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. Okay. Where do we start? Over the next few days, Emma and Nathan worked tirelessly to piece together clues about his past. With Detective Hale's reluctant assistance, they uncovered a trail of evidence pointing toward one person, Julian Sterling, Nathan's half-brother. Julian had always lived in Nathan's shadow, overshadowed by his older brother's success and charisma. While Nathan built an empire, Julian struggled to make a name for himself, often clashing with their mother, Eleanor, over inheritance disputes. The more Emma and Nathan learned, the clearer it became, Julian had motive, opportunity, and means. He wanted control of the company, Nathan murmured one evening, staring at a photo of Julian on his laptop. He thought if I was out of the picture, everything would fall into his lap. But he underestimated you, Emma said firmly. You survived. And now he knows you're awake. Nathan turned to her, his expression grim. Which means he'll try again. Emma reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. Not if we stop him first. As they delved deeper into the mystery, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Late one night, as she left the hospital, she noticed a dark sedan parked across the street. Its headlights were off, and the windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside. Her heart raced as she quickened her pace, glancing over her shoulder every few steps. When she finally reached her car, she locked the doors immediately and sped away, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The next morning, she told Nathan about the incident, her voice trembling with unease. I think Julian knows we're onto him. Nathan's eyes narrowed, his protective instincts kicking in. Then we need to be careful. Both of us. Emma nodded, determination hardening her features. We will. Whatever it takes. Despite the growing danger, Emma and Nathan grew closer, united by their shared mission. They spent hours poring over documents, strategizing with Detective Hale, and preparing for the confrontation they knew was inevitable. Through it all, Emma realized something profound. Nathan wasn't just the man she cared for, he was her partner, her ally. And together, they were unstoppable. One evening, as they sat side by side in his room, Nathan turned to her suddenly. Emma? Yes, she replied, looking up from the papers scattered across her lap. No matter what happens, he said softly, his gaze steady, thank you for believing in me. For fighting for me. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, and she smiled faintly. Always. As they continued planning, Emma felt a surge of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with risks and challenges. But with Nathan by her side, she knew they could face anything, even the shadows of his past. Nathan Sterling wasn't used to feeling powerless. Even in the months following his awakening, when his body had betrayed him and his mind was a labyrinth of confusion, he'd managed to hold on to fragments of control. But now, as he sat alone in his hospital room late at night, staring blankly at the wall, frustration bubbled just beneath the surface. It wasn't just the physical limitations or the slow recovery, it was the memories. Or rather, the lack of them. Every day, Emma encouraged him to keep trying, assuring him that pieces of his past might resurface over time. But how could he trust her optimism when all he felt was emptiness? His life before the accident was like a locked door without a key, and no matter how hard he pushed, it refused to budge. "Why can't I remember?" he muttered under his breath one evening, slamming his fist lightly against the bedside table. "It's like my own brain is working against me." Emma, who had been quietly organizing his medication schedule nearby, looked up sharply. She crossed the room and knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're putting too much pressure on yourself," she said softly. "Memories aren't something you can force, they'll come back when they're ready." He glanced at her, his dark eyes clouded with irritation. "And what if they don't? What if I'm stuck like this forever, half a person, half a life?" "You're not half a person," she replied firmly, her voice unwavering. "You're more than your memories, Nathan. You're kind, brave, and determined. Those qualities haven't disappeared, they're still here, inside you." Her words lingered in the air between them, soft but steady, like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. Slowly, Nathan exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "I just wish I could do more," he admitted quietly. "For myself, for us." Emma hesitated, caught off guard by the vulnerability in his tone. "We're doing everything we can," she said finally, offering a small smile. "One step at a time." The next morning, they dove back into their investigation, determined to uncover the truth about Julian Sterling. With Detective Marcus Hale's reluctant blessing, they gained access to financial records linked to Julian's accounts. Sitting side by side in Nathan's room, they pored over spreadsheets and transaction logs, searching for anything unusual. "This doesn't make sense," Nathan murmured, pointing to a series of large transfers marked as consulting fees. Julian never worked as a consultant, he barely held down a job. Emma leaned closer, squinting at the screen. "Look where the money's going," she said, tapping the address listed in the notes section. "That's an offshore account tied to someone named Victor Kane." The name sent a chill down her spine. She recognized it immediately, a notorious hitman whose name had surfaced in several high-profile cases over the years. "Victor Kane," she whispered, turning to Nathan. "If Julian hired him." "He wanted me dead," Nathan finished grimly, his jaw tightening. "No wonder he didn't care whether I lived or died after the accident." Emma nodded, her stomach churning. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture far darker than either of them had imagined. Julian hadn't acted out of greed alone, this was personal. He hated Nathan, not just for overshadowing him, but for existing at all. "We need proof," Emma said firmly, breaking the tense silence. "Something concrete we can take to the police." Nathan agreed, though his expression remained troubled. "But until then, we have to be careful. If Julian finds out we're onto him." "He won't," Emma interrupted quickly, forcing a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "We'll stay one step ahead of him." Despite their resolve, danger crept closer than either of them anticipated. That evening, as Emma walked to her car after leaving the hospital, she noticed the same dark sedan parked across the street. It had followed her before, lurking silently like a predator waiting to strike. Her pulse quickened as she fumbled with her keys, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Before she could get inside, her phone buzzed loudly in her pocket. Heart pounding, she pulled it out and opened the text message that had just arrived. "Stay away from Nathan Sterling. This isn't your fight." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Anonymous threats weren't uncommon in situations like this, but seeing them directed at her made the stakes feel terrifyingly real. For a moment, she stood frozen, staring at the screen. Then, with trembling hands, she snapped a photo of the message and forwarded it to Detective Hale. "I think Julian knows we're getting close," she told him when he called back moments later. "What should I do?" "Lay low," Hale advised gruffly. "Don't go anywhere alone, and keep me updated. I'll see what I can dig up on this Victor Kane character." Emma nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Okay. Thanks, detective. As she drove home, her mind raced. How had Julian found out? Was someone watching them? And most importantly, how far would he go to protect his secrets? Back at the hospital the next day, Emma filled Nathan in on the threat, her voice shaking slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. It's probably nothing, she tried to reassure him, though her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of his bed. Just a scare tactic. It's not nothing, Nathan countered sharply, his protective instincts flaring. This is exactly why I told you to be careful. And I am being careful, she shot back, her frustration bubbling over. But running away isn't going to solve anything. We need to finish this, to expose Julian for who he really is. Nathan studied her for a long moment, his gaze softening. You're incredible, you know that, he said finally, reaching out to take her hand. Most people would have walked away by now. But you keep fighting. Emma smiled faintly, her cheeks flushing despite herself. Someone has to. They sat in silence for a while, holding on to each other's hands as though drawing strength from the connection. Despite the looming danger, Emma felt a spark of hope. Together, they were unraveling the web Julian had spun, and sooner or later, they'd find the thread that brought it crashing down. Over the next few days, Emma and Nathan redoubled their efforts, piecing together evidence and strategizing their next move. They knew the risks, they could feel them closing in, but neither of them was willing to back down. Not when the truth was within reach. One evening, as they reviewed the latest batch of documents, Nathan turned to her suddenly. When this is over, he said softly, his voice tinged with uncertainty, what happens to us? Emma blinked, caught off guard by the question. What do you mean? I mean, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Once we've dealt with Julian, once I've figured out who I am again, where does that leave you and me? Her heart skipped a beat, and she looked away, pretending to focus on the papers in front of her. Let's worry about one thing at a time, okay? Right now, our priority is stopping Julian. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the flutter of emotion his words stirred. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain, Nathan Sterling had changed her life in ways she never expected, and she wasn't ready to let go of him anytime soon. It started with a flicker, a fleeting image that darted across Nathan's mind like a shadow in the corner of his eye. He was sitting alone in his hospital room, staring absently at the rain streaking down the windowpane, when it hit him. A memory. Or at least, the ghost of one. He could see himself behind the wheel of his car, the windshield wipers struggling against a torrential downpour. The road ahead was slick and dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of his headlights. And then, panic. A sudden realization that something was wrong. His foot pressing hard on the brake pedal, but nothing happened. The car careening out of control as adrenaline surged through his veins. Nathan gripped the edge of his bed, his knuckles white, as the fragmented scene replayed itself over and over in his mind. It wasn't much, just a few scattered moments, but it was enough to send chills racing down his spine. Someone had done this to him. Someone had tried to kill him. Emma, he called out urgently, his voice hoarse but insistent. She appeared moments later, her expression shifting from concern to alarm as she took in the intensity of his gaze. What is it? Are you okay? I remember, he said breathlessly, his words tumbling out faster than he could process them. The night of the crash, I remember parts of it. Emma's eyes widened, and she hurried to his side, placing a steadying hand on his arm. Tell me everything. As he recounted the flashes of memory, the rain, the brakes failing, the sheer terror, he felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because the fog in his mind was finally lifting, even if only slightly. Dread because now he knew for certain, this hadn't been an accident. Someone had planned it. Someone close to him. It has to be Julian, Nathan murmured, his voice low and dangerous. Who else would have access to my car? Who else had reason to want me gone? Emma nodded slowly, her jaw tightening. Then we need to confront him. The confrontation came sooner than either of them expected. Later that evening, while Emma was updating Detective Hale on Nathan's recovered memories, Julian Sterling walked into the hospital unannounced. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, he exuded arrogance, his sharp features twisted into a smug grin as he approached Nathan's room. "Well, well," Julian drawled, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Look who's awake. I heard rumors, but I didn't believe them." Nathan stiffened, his fists clenching involuntarily at his sides. "Julian." "Big brother," Julian replied mockingly, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "You're looking better than expected. Though I suppose miracles do happen occasionally." Emma moved instinctively closer to Nathan, her presence a silent show of support. "What are you doing here?" she demanded sharply. Julian ignored her, his attention fixed solely on Nathan. "I came to see for myself whether the rumors were true. Imagine my surprise when I found out you're not only alive but also causing trouble." Nathan's eyes narrowed, his voice cold and steady. "You tampered with my brakes, didn't you?" For a moment, Julian's mask slipped, revealing a flicker of unease. But just as quickly, his composure returned, and he laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "Oh, come now, Nathan. Do you really think I'd admit to something like that?" "You don't have to," Nathan shot back, his tone razor-sharp. "I remember enough. And so does Victor Kane." Julian's smile faltered, replaced by a flash of anger. "You've been digging where you shouldn't, big brother. Poking your nose into things that don't concern you." "They concern me when they almost got me killed," Nathan growled, taking a step forward despite the weakness in his legs. "Why, Julian? Why go this far?" Julian shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Let's just say you were never meant to survive. You always had everything handed to you, our parents' love, their fortune, the company. While I was left picking up scraps, you strutted around like some golden boy. It was pathetic. So you decided to kill me?" Nathan asked incredulously, his voice rising. "That's your solution? It worked for a while, didn't it?" Julian sneered. 14 months in a coma, that's practically dead. Too bad you woke up." Before Nathan could respond, the door burst open, and Detective Marcus Hale strode in, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. In his hand, he held a folder thick with documents. "Julian Sterling, you're under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit homicide." Julian's face went pale, his confident facade crumbling instantly. "This is ridiculous. You can't prove anything." Hale smirked, flipping open the folder. "Actually, we can. Thanks to Ms. Caldwell and Mr. Sterling here, we traced those offshore payments directly to you. Not to mention Victor Kane's confession. He's singing like a canary." As the officers cuffed Julian and led him away, Nathan sank back onto the edge of his bed, his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. Emma knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around him tightly. "It's over," she whispered. "You're safe now." But Nathan shook his head, his gaze distant. "No, it's not. There's still so much I don't remember. So much I need to figure out." Emma pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes. "We'll figure it out together. One step at a time." Later that night, after the chaos had subsided, Nathan sat alone in his room, staring at the ceiling. The weight of what had happened pressed heavily on his chest, but beneath it all, there was a glimmer of hope. For the first time since waking up, he felt like he was reclaiming a piece of himself, not just the man he used to be, but the man he was becoming. There was still a long road ahead, filled with unanswered questions and lingering shadows. But as Emma walked into the room, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee, Nathan allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have to face it alone. "To new beginnings," she said softly, handing him a cup. He smiled faintly, raising his mug in a silent toast. To new beginnings. The days following Julian's arrest were a blur of relief and reflection for Nathan. For the first time in what felt like forever, he could breathe without the weight of suspicion hanging over him. The man who had tried to destroy his life was behind bars, and though the scars, both physical and emotional, remained, Nathan felt a renewed sense of purpose. His focus shifted entirely to recovery, to rebuilding not just his body but also the fragments of his identity that still eluded him. Emma became his anchor during this process, her presence unwavering as she guided him through grueling hours of physical therapy. Each session pushed him to his limits, testing his strength and resolve, but Emma's encouragement never wavered. She cheered him on when he struggled, celebrated every small victory, and reminded him why he couldn't give up. "You're doing amazing," she said one afternoon after a particularly challenging workout. They sat together in the hospital gym, Nathan leaning heavily against the wall while Emma handed him a bottle of water. "Look how far you've come." He took a long sip, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "It doesn't feel like enough," he admitted, his voice tinged with frustration. "I should be able to do more by now." "Recovery isn't about rushing," she replied gently, her tone firm yet kind. "It's about progress. You're stronger than you think, Nathan." Her words soothed him, as they always did, but it wasn't just her advice that kept him going, it was her laughter, her patience, the way she seemed to understand him without needing explanations. Over the weeks, Nathan found himself growing increasingly drawn to her, his feelings deepening in ways he hadn't anticipated. But confessing those feelings? That terrified him. One evening, as they sat together in his room, Nathan watched Emma intently while she flipped through a magazine. Her hair was pulled back into its usual loose ponytail, strands escaping to frame her face, and there was a smudge of ink on her wrist from earlier paperwork. To anyone else, she might have looked ordinary, but to Nathan, she was extraordinary. "Why are you staring at me like that?" she asked suddenly, glancing up with a teasing smile. Caught off guard, Nathan blinked and looked away, heat rising to his cheeks. "I wasn't staring." "Yes, you were," she countered, laughing softly. "What's on your mind?" He hesitated, searching for an excuse. "Nothing important," he muttered, focusing instead on adjusting the blanket around his legs. Emma studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "You can talk to me, you know. About anything." "I know," he said quickly, avoiding her gaze. But the truth was, he couldn't talk to her, not about this. Not yet. Confessing his feelings would change everything, and he wasn't ready to risk losing the fragile balance they'd built between them. Outside of the hospital, Lisa Carter continued to play matchmaker, convinced that Emma harbored feelings for Nathan despite her best friend's protests. One Saturday afternoon, as they lounged at their favorite diner, Lisa leaned across the table, her eyes gleaming mischievously. "So," she began, swirling her milkshake with exaggerated enthusiasm, "how's Prince Charming doing these days?" Emma rolled her eyes, though a faint blush crept onto her cheeks. "His name is Nathan, Lisa. And he's fine. Making good progress." Lisa drawled, clearly unconvinced. "And how are you doing?" "What do you mean?" Emma asked defensively, taking a sip of her coffee to avoid meeting Lisa's knowing gaze. "Oh, come on," Lisa teased, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Don't act like I haven't noticed the googly eyes you two make at each other. It's adorable, and completely obvious." "There are no googly eyes," Emma insisted, though her cheeks flushed brighter. "We're friends. That's all. Friends don't spend every waking moment together unless there's something more going on," Lisa shot back triumphantly. "Admit it, you've got a thing for him." Emma sighed, setting her cup down with a soft clink. "Even if I did, which I'm not saying I do, it wouldn't matter. He's my patient, Lisa. There's a line I can't cross. Lisa raised an eyebrow skeptically. A line you already crossed months ago when you started talking to him like he was your boyfriend. Face it, Em, you're falling for him. Emma opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself. What was the point? Deep down, she knew Lisa was right. Spending so much time with Nathan had changed something inside her. She cared about him, not just as a nurse caring for her patient, but as a woman drawn to a man who made her laugh, challenged her, and saw her in ways no one else ever had. Still, acting on those feelings was impossible. Or so she told herself. Back at the hospital, Nathan wrestled with similar doubts. He wanted to tell Emma how he felt, to let her know that she meant more to him than just a caregiver or a friend. But fear held him back, the fear of rejection, of ruining the bond they shared, of complicating things further. One night, as they prepared to leave the hospital, Nathan finally worked up the courage to say something. Emma, he began hesitantly, stopping her before she could step out the door. She turned, eyebrows raised curiously. Yeah. He faltered, the words catching in his throat. I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. You've been incredible. Emma smiled warmly, though there was a flicker of disappointment in her eyes, a fleeting shadow he almost missed. You don't have to thank me, Nathan. I'm just doing my job. No, he said firmly, shaking his head. It's more than that. You've given me hope when I didn't think I had any left. You've been my rock. Her smile softened, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Then, reluctantly, she glanced at her watch. I should go. It's late. Right, Nathan murmured, stepping aside to let her pass. As she walked away, he exhaled deeply, frustrated with himself for not saying what he truly wanted to. Maybe someday, he thought. Someday soon. Despite the tension simmering beneath the surface, their bond only grew stronger. Emma continued to push Nathan through rehab, cheering him on as he took his first steps outside the hospital grounds. Nathan, in turn, encouraged her to open up about her own dreams and fears, listening intently as she spoke about her aspirations beyond nursing. You're too talented to stay cooped up in a hospital forever, he told her one evening as they sat together on a bench overlooking the city skyline. You should chase your dreams, Emma. Whatever they are. She laughed softly, shaking her head. And leave you here alone? No chance. Her words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Neither of them acknowledged it outright, but the implication was clear. Their lives were intertwined now, bound by shared struggles and quiet moments of connection. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Nathan reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers tentatively. Emma didn't pull away. Instead, she intertwined her fingers with his, squeezing gently. For now, that was enough. Words could wait. Because in that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city and the warmth of her touch, Nathan realized something profound. Love didn't need to be spoken to be understood. Sometimes, it simply needed to be felt. It was a rare evening when the hospital felt truly quiet. The usual hum of activity had faded into a gentle stillness, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves in the gardens outside. Nathan Sterling stood at the edge of the courtyard, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie as he waited for Emma to join him. He'd been planning this moment for days, weeks, really, but now that it was finally here, his nerves threatened to get the better of him. The hospital gardens were modest but beautiful, with winding stone paths and clusters of flowers that somehow managed to thrive despite the sterile environment surrounding them. Nathan had always found solace in these small pockets of nature during his recovery, but tonight, they felt different. Special. Like they were meant to be shared. When Emma appeared, her scrubs replaced by jeans and a light sweater, Nathan's breath caught in his throat. She looked effortless, beautiful, and completely unaware of the storm of emotions swirling inside him. "You wanted to show me something?" she asked, smiling curiously as she approached. He nodded, gesturing toward the path ahead. "Yeah. Just, come with me." Emma raised an eyebrow but followed without question, her sneakers crunching softly against the gravel. They walked in silence for a while, the cool night air wrapping around them like a comforting embrace. Fireflies danced lazily in the distance, their golden flickers casting a magical glow over the scene. "This place is amazing," Emma murmured, glancing around in awe. "I didn't realize how peaceful it could be out here." "It's one of my favorite spots," Nathan admitted, his voice low and steady. "I thought you might like it." She turned to look at him, her expression softening. "Thank you for bringing me here." Nathan hesitated, his heart pounding as he searched for the right words. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading and longing for all at once. Taking a deep breath, he stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his tone serious but tinged with vulnerability. "Something I've been holding back for too long." Emma's smile faltered slightly, concern flickering in her eyes. "What is it?" He reached out instinctively, taking her hand in his. Her fingers were warm, grounding him even as his mind raced. "You've done so much for me, Emma. More than anyone else ever has. You've helped me recover, reminded me who I am, or who I'm becoming. But what you don't realize is, you've saved me in ways I can't even put into words." Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to interrupt, but she stayed silent, letting him continue. "I know there are rules," he said, his grip tightening ever so slightly. "Boundaries we're supposed to respect. But I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is just friendship. It's not. Not anymore." Emma's breath hitched audibly, her cheeks flushing as she stared at him, wide-eyed. "Nathan." "No, let me finish," he insisted gently, his gaze unwavering. "You've become everything to me, my anchor, my reason to keep fighting. I love you, Emma. And I don't care about the consequences or the risks. All I care about is being honest with you." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, shimmering in the dim light. For a moment, she simply stood there, overwhelmed by the weight of his confession. Then, slowly, she smiled, a trembling, heartfelt smile that made Nathan's chest ache with hope. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "I have for a while now, but I was scared to admit it. Scared of ruining what we have." "You won't ruin anything," Nathan replied firmly, stepping closer until they were inches apart. "We'll figure it out together. Whatever happens, we'll face it side by side." Without another word, he cupped her face in his hands, his touch tender yet sure. Their eyes locked, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to fade away entirely. Then, leaning in, he kissed her. It was soft and hesitant at first, as though neither of them could quite believe it was happening. But as Emma responded, her arms wrapping around his neck, the kiss deepened, filled with all the emotions they'd kept bottled up for so long. It was a promise, a declaration of trust, love, and hope for the future. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and grinning like fools, Emma rested her forehead against his. "This changes everything," she murmured, her voice laced with wonder. "Not everything," Nathan corrected softly. "Just the best parts." They stayed in the garden for hours, talking and laughing under the stars. For the first time in months, maybe even years, Nathan felt whole again, not because his memories had returned or because his physical strength was fully restored, but because he wasn't alone anymore. Emma had given him something far more valuable than answers or independence. She'd given him a reason to keep moving forward. As they walked back toward the hospital, hand in hand, Nathan glanced at her and smiled. "So, does this mean I get to take you on a proper date sometime?" Emma laughed, nudging him playfully. Only if you promise not to make me wait another year to hear those 3 little words again." "Deal," he said, squeezing her hand tightly. "But fair warning, I plan on saying them a lot." "Good," she replied, her smile radiant. "Because I never get tired of hearing them." And as they stepped back inside, leaving the quiet serenity of the gardens behind, Nathan knew one thing for certain: no matter what challenges lay ahead, he wouldn't face them alone. With Emma by his side, he was ready for anything. Months had passed since Nathan Sterling's confession in the hospital gardens, and life had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. Physically, he was stronger than ever, his muscles regained their tone, his gait steady and confident. Mentally, though fragments of his past still lingered just out of reach, he no longer felt the desperate need to reclaim every memory. What mattered most wasn't what he'd lost, it was what he'd found. And what he'd found was Emma Caldwell. Their relationship had blossomed quietly but steadily, built on late-night conversations, shared laughter, and the kind of unspoken understanding that only comes from weathering storms together. Nathan had returned to Sterling Enterprises, stepping back into the role of CEO with a perspective that shocked even himself. The ruthless ambition that once defined him was gone, replaced by a newfound appreciation for balance, connection, and purpose. Wealth meant nothing without love, and Nathan knew now that Emma was his greatest treasure. The idea for the proposal came to him one evening as he stood on the rooftop of Sterling Tower, staring out at the glittering city skyline. It was the same view he'd admired countless times before, but this time, it felt different. This time, he saw it through her eyes, the way she marveled at the beauty of simple things, the way she made even the ordinary feel extraordinary. He wanted the moment to be perfect, not over the top or ostentatious, but meaningful. Something that reflected not just who he was now, but who they were together. With Lisa's enthusiastic help and occasional teasing, Nathan meticulously planned every detail. He arranged for fairy lights to be strung across the rooftop, creating a canopy of soft golden light. A small table was set up near the edge, adorned with candles and a bouquet of wildflowers, Emma's favorite. And in his pocket, nestled safely in a velvet box, was the ring he'd spent weeks choosing, elegant yet understated, just like her. When the night finally arrived, Nathan paced nervously near the elevator, adjusting his tie for the 100th time. His heart raced with anticipation, each second stretching endlessly until the doors slid open and Emma stepped out. She looked breathtaking, dressed in a simple navy blue dress that hugged her figure perfectly. Her hair cascaded loosely over her shoulders, catching the glow of the fairy lights as she took in the scene around her. "Nathan?" she asked, her voice tinged with surprise. "What is all this?" "This," he said softly, walking toward her with a nervous smile, "is me trying to show you how much you mean to me." Her cheeks flushed, and she laughed softly, shaking her head. "You didn't have to do all this." "Yes, I did," he replied firmly, taking her hands in his. "Because you deserve everything beautiful in the world, and because I wanted tonight to remind you of how amazing you are." Emma's eyes shimmered with emotion as she squeezed his hands. "You already do that every day." Nathan's chest tightened, overwhelmed by the depth of her sincerity. For a moment, he simply stared at her, memorizing the curve of her smile, the warmth in her gaze. Then, taking a deep breath, he guided her to the edge of the rooftop, where the city stretched endlessly before them. "I used to think success was about power," he began, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of nerves inside him. "About building empires, making money, proving myself to the world. But then I woke up in that hospital bed, broken and lost, and none of it mattered anymore. None of it meant anything without someone to share it with." He turned to face her fully, his expression raw and vulnerable. "That's when I realized something important. You didn't just save my life, Emma, you became my life. Every laugh, every tear, every moment we've shared, it's taught me what truly matters. Love. Connection. Us." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, spilling silently down her cheeks as she listened. Nathan reached into his pocket, pulling out the velvet box and dropping to one knee. The movement startled her, and she gasped, covering her mouth with trembling fingers. "Emma Caldwell," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me?" For a moment, there was silence, just the faint hum of the city below and the beating of their hearts. Then, with a radiant smile that lit up the entire rooftop, Emma nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, of course." Nathan exhaled sharply, relief and happiness flooding through him as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, just like she did in his life. Standing, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if afraid she might disappear. "You've made me the happiest man alive," he murmured against her ear, his voice choked with emotion. "And you've done the same for me," she replied, pulling back slightly to meet his gaze. "I can't wait to spend forever with you." They stayed on the rooftop long after the candles burned low, wrapped in each other's arms as the city sparkled beneath them. Nathan couldn't stop looking at the ring on her finger, marveling at how something so small could symbolize something so vast. Love. Commitment. A future filled with endless possibilities. As the first hints of dawn painted the horizon in shades of pink and gold, Emma rested her head on his shoulder, her voice soft but steady. "Do you think we'll ever get used to being this happy?" Nathan chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I hope not. I think we should keep surprising each other, for the rest of our lives." She smiled, her eyes closing contentedly. "Deal." And as the sun rose over the city, casting its warm light on the couple standing hand in hand, Nathan knew one thing for certain: whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because with Emma by his side, he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. The Sterling estate had never looked more breathtaking. Nestled amidst rolling hills and lush gardens, the sprawling mansion was transformed into a fairy tale setting for Nathan and Emma's wedding day. White roses cascaded down trellises lining the outdoor ceremony space, their sweet fragrance mingling with the crisp autumn air. Strings of twinkling lights crisscrossed above, casting a warm glow over the rows of guests seated beneath an archway adorned with ivy and blooms. For Nathan, it felt surreal to see so many people gathered here, not just colleagues and acquaintances, but friends he'd made along the way, nurses from St. Augustine Hospital who had become like family, and even Lisa Carter, whose relentless teasing had somehow turned her into one of Emma's closest confidants. But as he stood at the altar, adjusting his tie nervously, there was only one person on his mind. Emma. She was still hidden away in the bridal suite, getting ready with Lisa by her side. He imagined her pacing anxiously, smoothing out invisible wrinkles in her dress, maybe even shedding a few happy tears. The thought made him smile, though his heart raced with anticipation. In less than an hour, she would walk toward him, and they would begin the next chapter of their lives together. Inside the bridal suite, Emma stared at her reflection in the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman staring back. Her gown, a flowing ivory creation with delicate lace appliques, fit her like a dream, hugging her figure before flaring out into a soft train. Her hair was styled in loose waves, pinned back with pearl-studded clips, and her makeup was subtle yet radiant. But it wasn't the dress or the accessories that made her feel beautiful, it was knowing that today marked the culmination of everything she and Nathan had been through. "You look stunning," Lisa said softly, dabbing at her own eyes with a tissue. "Seriously, Em, I've never seen anyone look this happy." Emma laughed, turning to hug her best friend tightly. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You've been my rock through all of it." "Ah, stop," Lisa teased, though her voice cracked slightly. "You're gonna make me cry again." As they shared a quiet moment, the door opened, and Eleanor Sterling stepped inside. Emma froze, unsure what to expect. Nathan's estranged mother hadn't exactly been part of their journey, and while she'd agreed to attend the wedding, Emma hadn't anticipated seeing her before the ceremony. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Eleanor began hesitantly, her usual poise softened by an uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I wanted to speak with you, privately." Emma nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "Of course." Eleanor took a deep breath, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "I know I haven't always been the kind of mother Nathan deserved, or the kind of grandmother your future children deserve. And I can't change the past. But I want you to know how grateful I am for you." Emma blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in Eleanor's tone. "Grateful?" "Yes," Eleanor replied, her gaze steady. "You brought my son back to life, not just physically, but emotionally. Before you, he was lost. Broken. Now, when I look at him, I see the man he was always meant to be. And I owe that to you." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, and she reached out instinctively, taking Eleanor's hand. "Thank you for saying that. It means so much." Eleanor smiled faintly, her composure faltering for just a moment. "Take care of him, Emma. He loves you more than words can say." "I will," Emma promised, her voice thick with emotion. "And I'll do my best to help him reconnect with you too." Eleanor nodded, standing slowly. "That's all I can ask for." With one last glance at Emma, she left the room, leaving behind a sense of reconciliation and hope. When the processional music began, Emma's nerves melted away. Clutching her bouquet of wildflowers, she linked arms with Lisa, who had graciously offered to walk her down the aisle. As they stepped outside, the sunlight filtering through the trees bathed the scene in golden light. Every head turned to watch her approach, but Emma's focus was solely on Nathan. He stood tall and handsome beneath the floral arch, his dark suit perfectly tailored, his eyes shining with unshed tears. When their gazes met, the world around them seemed to fade away entirely. All that mattered was the love reflected in his expression, the same love that had carried them through every challenge. As Lisa handed her off to Nathan, he whispered, "You're perfect." "So are you," she replied, her voice trembling with joy. The officiant began the ceremony, but neither of them paid much attention to the formalities. Instead, they held onto each other's hands tightly, savoring the weight of the moment. When it came time for their vows, Nathan cleared his throat, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Emma," he began, "when I woke up in that hospital bed, I didn't know who I was, or if I'd ever find myself again. But then you walked into my life, and suddenly, everything made sense. You taught me how to fight, how to heal, and most importantly, how to love. Today, I promise to stand by your side through every triumph and every trial, just as you've stood by mine. You're my heart, my soul, my forever." Emma wiped away a tear, her lips curving into a shaky smile as she responded. "Nathan, you've given me a love I never thought possible. A love built on trust, resilience, and unwavering support. Through every step of this journey, you've shown me what it means to truly live. So today, I promise to cherish you, to believe in you, and to remind you every single day just how extraordinary you are. I love you, now and always." Their voices echoed softly across the grounds, met with sniffles and applause from the guests. As they exchanged rings and sealed their vows with a kiss, the crowd erupted into cheers, but Nathan and Emma were lost in their own world, a bubble of pure happiness. The reception was a whirlwind of laughter, dancing, and heartfelt speeches. Nathan and Emma's first dance as Mr. and Mrs. Sterling took place beneath the starlit sky, surrounded by the glow of fairy lights. As they swayed to a slow melody, Nathan rested his forehead against hers, his voice barely audible over the music. "This is just the beginning," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Emma smiled, her eyes sparkling with tears. "Our greatest adventure." And as they moved together, wrapped in each other's arms, Nathan knew she was right. Their story wasn't just about survival, it was about finding beauty in brokenness, strength in vulnerability, and love in the most unexpected places. Together, they had created something extraordinary. The months following their wedding were a blur of joy, adjustment, and purpose for Nathan and Emma Sterling. Their honeymoon, a quiet retreat to a secluded cabin in the mountains, had been everything they'd dreamed of: long walks through snow-dusted trails, cozy evenings by the fire, and endless conversations about the future. But as they returned home, reality settled in, bringing with it a renewed sense of responsibility. Nathan had spent years building an empire, but now he wanted to use his wealth and influence for something greater. Inspired by their journey together, and by the scars that still lingered from his own brush with death, he decided to launch a foundation dedicated to supporting victims of attempted murder and violent crimes. It wasn't just a project, it was a mission born out of gratitude and resilience. One crisp morning, Nathan sat at the kitchen island, sketching ideas for the foundation's logo while Emma sipped her coffee nearby. She watched him with a fond smile, marveling at how much he'd changed since the days when his life revolved solely around business deals and boardroom battles. "You're really serious about this, aren't you?" she asked, raising an eyebrow playfully. "Deadly serious," Nathan replied without looking up, his tone light-hearted but sincere. "This isn't just another venture, Emma. It's personal." "I know," she said softly, reaching across the counter to place a hand over his. "And I think it's incredible. You're turning something painful into something meaningful." He paused, setting down his pen to meet her gaze. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. Every step of the way, you've reminded me what truly matters." Emma blushed slightly, shaking her head. "You give me too much credit. This is all you." "No," Nathan insisted firmly, intertwining their fingers. "It's us. Together." The foundation quickly gained traction, thanks in part to Nathan's reputation and connections, but also because of the genuine passion behind its mission. They named it the Phoenix Initiative, symbolizing rebirth and hope. Its goal was simple yet ambitious: to provide resources, counseling, and financial support to individuals recovering from violent crimes, helping them rebuild their lives with dignity and strength. Emma threw herself into the work alongside Nathan, using her nursing background to assist in developing programs tailored to survivors' physical and emotional needs. Together, they traveled to conferences, met with advocacy groups, and visited hospitals to share their story. Each interaction reinforced their belief that love and compassion could heal even the deepest wounds. One evening, after a particularly moving event where a young woman shared her harrowing recovery from an attack, Nathan turned to Emma as they drove home. His voice was low, heavy with emotion. "Do you remember when I woke up in that hospital bed? When I thought my life was over?" Emma nodded, glancing at him briefly before returning her focus to the road. "Of course. I never imagined I'd end up here," he continued, staring out the window at the passing city lights. "Helping others, finding purpose, loving you. Back then, I thought I had everything: money, power, success. But none of it meant anything until I found you." She smiled faintly, her heart swelling with affection. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" "We have," Nathan agreed, his tone softening. "And I owe it all to you. You didn't just save my life, Emma. You gave me a reason to live it fully." As weeks turned into months, Nathan and Emma settled into a rhythm that balanced their professional endeavors with their personal lives. Weekends were reserved for quiet mornings, lazy afternoons, and long hikes in the countryside. They filled their home with laughter, music, and the promise of a future brimming with possibilities. One chilly autumn afternoon, they stood together on the balcony of their penthouse apartment, wrapped in blankets as they watched the sun dip below the horizon. The city stretched endlessly before them, alive with light and energy, but their attention was focused solely on each other. "You know," Nathan began, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "there's something I've been meaning to say." Emma tilted her head curiously, her eyes reflecting the golden hues of the fading sunset. "What is it?" He turned to face her fully, his expression tender yet resolute. "I thought I had everything before I met you. Success, wealth, status, they all seemed so important. But now I know, you are the greatest thing that ever happened to me." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, shimmering in the dim light. "Nathan." "No, let me finish," he interrupted gently, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You've shown me what it means to truly live, to love deeply, to care selflessly, to find beauty in every moment. And I want you to know that no matter where life takes us, nothing will ever compare to the gift of having you by my side." Emma leaned into him, resting her head against his chest as his arms wrapped around her protectively. "I feel the same way," she murmured, her voice muffled but full of emotion. "You've given me a love I never thought possible. A family I never knew I needed." They stood there for a long time, holding each other as the last rays of sunlight faded into darkness. In that moment, surrounded by the hum of the city in the warmth of their embrace, Nathan and Emma realized something profound. Their journey wasn't defined by the challenges they'd faced or the victories they'd achieved, it was defined by the bond they'd created. A bond forged through adversity, strengthened by trust, and illuminated by love. Years later, as they celebrated milestones both big and small, the launch of new initiatives, anniversaries, birthdays, they often reflected on how far they'd come. Their lives were far from perfect, but perfection wasn't the goal. What mattered was the connection they shared, the impact they made, and the legacy they were building together. On one such occasion, a quiet evening spent reminiscing over old photos, Emma looked up at Nathan with a teasing grin. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if I hadn't walked into your hospital room that day?" Nathan chuckled, pulling her close. "Every day. And every day, I thank whatever force brought us together." Emma laughed softly, snuggling into his arms. "Me too." The final scene unfolded on a warm summer night, years after their wedding. Nathan and Emma stood once again on the rooftop of Sterling Tower, the city sprawled beneath them like a glittering tapestry. Fireflies danced lazily in the air, casting a magical glow over the moment. Nathan leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to Emma's temple. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant hum of traffic. "For what?" she asked, turning to look at him with a curious smile. "For being you," he replied simply, his gaze steady and unwavering. "For loving me. For believing in me. For showing me that true happiness isn't about what you have, it's about who you share it with." Emma's smile softened, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Always." And as they stood there, hand in hand, watching the stars twinkle above the skyline, the camera slowly panned upward, capturing the vastness of the night sky before fading to black. Fade out. The lessons we carry forward. At its heart, this story is about resilience, love, and the transformative power of human connection. Nathan Sterling's journey reminds us that life's greatest challenges often lead to our most profound growth. When he woke up in that hospital bed, broken and lost, he had no idea how far he would come, not just physically, but emotionally. Through Emma's unwavering care and compassion, he learned that true strength isn't measured by wealth or success, but by the relationships we nurture and the lives we touch. Emma, too, teaches us an invaluable lesson: the importance of seeing people for who they are beneath their struggles. Her dedication to Nathan wasn't just about nursing him back to health, it was about believing in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Together, they showed us that love can bloom in the unlikeliest places and that even in our darkest moments, hope has a way of finding us. But perhaps the most powerful takeaway from their story is this: life isn't about avoiding pain or hardship, it's about what we do with those experiences. Nathan turned his trauma into purpose, creating a foundation that helps others rise from their own ashes. And Emma proved that kindness, patience, and empathy can change not only one life but countless others. So, what can we take away from all of this? That every challenge is an opportunity to grow, every act of love leaves a lasting impact, and every person we meet has the potential to shape our future in ways we might never expect. If you were moved by Nathan and Emma's journey, don't let the inspiration end here. Stories like these remind us of the beauty and complexity of the human experience, and there's so much more where that came from. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another tale of courage, love, and triumph. Whether you're looking for heartfelt romance, gripping drama, or lessons that stay with you long after the credits roll, we've got something special waiting for you. Thank you for joining us on this incredible adventure. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love, resilience, and second chances.